The rain hammered down on the asphalt like bullets from heaven, each drop exploding against Jake Ironhorse Morrison's leather jacket as he guided his Harley through the empty streets of downtown Portland. The rumble of his engine echoed off the brick walls of the industrial district, a mechanical heartbeat in the dead of night. Jake had been riding for 3 hours straight, needing the solitude that only the open road could provide. The Hells Angels had just concluded a tense meeting about territorial disputes with a rival club, and his mind was still processing the implications. At 42, Jake had seen enough violence to last several lifetimes, but the Brotherhood demanded constant vigilance. As he rounded the corner near the old warehouse district, something caught his peripheral vision. A dark shape huddled against a metal pole, barely visible in the dim streetlight. Jake's instincts, honed by years of street life, told him to keep riding. Nothing good ever came from investigating strange shapes in dark alleys. But something made him slow down. The shape moved slightly, and Jake realized it wasn't debris or a discarded bag. It was alive. He pulled his bike to the curb, the engine's rumble dying to a whisper as he dismounted. The rain continued its relentless assault, soaking through his jeans as he approached the figure. What he found made his blood run cold. A German shepherd, probably no more than 2 years old, was tied to the pole with a thick rope. The dog's fur was matted and soaked, its body shivering uncontrollably. Dark eyes looked up at Jake with a mixture of fear and desperate hope. The animal was clearly malnourished, its ribs visible beneath the wet coat. "Jesus Christ," Jake muttered, his voice barely audible over the rain. Jake crouched down slowly, keeping his movements deliberate and non-threatening. The dog's ears flattened against its head, but it didn't try to back away. There was nowhere to go. The rope around its neck was tied so tightly that Jake could see where it had rubbed the fur raw. "Easy there, boy," Jake said softly, his gravelly voice taking on an uncharacteristically gentle tone. "I'm not going to hurt you." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a pocket knife, the blade glinting in the streetlight. The dog's eyes widened, but Jake moved with practiced patience. Years of dealing with frightened animals and people had taught him the value of slow, predictable movements. The rope was thick and wet, making it difficult to cut. As Jake worked, he noticed other disturbing details. The dog had no collar, no identification tags. Its paws were raw and bloody, suggesting it had been struggling against its restraints for hours, maybe days. Most telling of all, there was no food or water bowl in sight. "Somebody just dumped you here, didn't they?" Jake said, continuing to work at the rope. "Left you to die." The blade finally cut through the last fibers, and the rope fell away. The dog didn't bolt, as Jake had expected. Instead, it remained perfectly still, as if it couldn't quite believe it was free. Jake could see the confusion in its eyes, the learned helplessness that came from prolonged abuse. "Come on, buddy," Jake said, standing up slowly. "You can't stay here." He walked back to his motorcycle, expecting the dog to follow. When he turned around, the German shepherd was still sitting by the pole, watching him with those dark, intelligent eyes. It wanted to trust him, Jake realized, but fear was winning the battle. Jake understood fear. He'd seen it in the eyes of countless people over the years, rivals who'd crossed the wrong line, witnesses who'd seen too much, even fellow club members facing their first real test of loyalty. But this was different. This was pure, innocent terror, born from cruelty. He walked back to the dog, moving even more slowly this time. When he was close enough, he extended his hand, palm up, letting the animal catch his scent. The dog's nose twitched, processing the mixture of leather, motor oil, and something else, something that spoke of safety. "I know you're scared," Jake said quietly, "but staying here means dying, and I'm betting you're not ready for that yet." The dog's tail gave the slightest wag, barely perceptible in the rain. It was enough. Jake shrugged out of his leather jacket, ignoring the immediate chill as the rain soaked through his t-shirt. He wrapped the jacket around the shivering animal, feeling how thin it was beneath the matted fur. The dog didn't resist, too exhausted and cold to fight anymore. Lifting the animal was easier than Jake had expected. It couldn't weigh more than 60 pounds, far too light for a German Shepherd of its size. He carried it to his motorcycle, where he faced his first real challenge. How do you transport a traumatized dog on a Harley? Jake had a bungee cord in his saddlebag, part of his standard road kit. He fashioned a makeshift harness, securing the dog to his chest while ensuring it could breathe freely. The animal pressed against him, seeking warmth and comfort. "All right, boy," Jake said, starting the engine. "Let's get you somewhere safe." The ride to his apartment was slow and careful, Jake hyper-aware of his precious cargo. The dog remained calm, perhaps understanding that this human was different from whoever had left it to die. Jake's apartment was a reflection of his lifestyle, sparse, functional, and meticulously clean. The walls were decorated with Hell's Angels memorabilia, vintage motorcycle posters, and a few photographs of fallen brothers. It wasn't a place designed for comfort, but it was secure. He set the dog down gently on his living room floor, where it immediately collapsed, exhaustion finally overtaking adrenaline. Jake grabbed every towel he owned and began the careful process of drying the animal's fur. The dog submitted to the attention with grateful passivity, too tired to be afraid anymore. As the matted fur began to dry, Jake could see the full extent of the animal's condition. Besides the obvious malnutrition and the rope burns around its neck, there were other signs of abuse, small scars that suggested kicks or blows, patches where fur had been torn out. This wasn't neglect, this was deliberate cruelty. Jake's jaw tightened as he worked. He'd seen plenty of violence in his life, had participated in more than his share. But there was something about hurting innocent creatures that crossed a line even hardened criminals respected. In prison, child molesters and animal abusers were considered the lowest form of life. The dog's breathing had steadied, and its shivering was subsiding. Jake went to his kitchen and found a can of chicken soup. Not ideal dog food, but better than nothing. He poured it into a bowl and set it down, along with a bowl of water. The animal looked at the food with obvious hunger, but didn't move toward it. Jake realized it was waiting for permission, a behavior that spoke of strict and probably violent training. "Go ahead," Jake said gently. "It's yours." The dog approached the bowls cautiously, sniffing first, then drinking deeply before turning to the soup. It ate slowly, deliberately, the way someone eats when they're not sure when their next meal might come. Jake woke to an unfamiliar sound, the soft breathing of another living creature. The German Shepherd had spent the night on the floor beside his bed, close enough for protection, but not presumptuous enough to claim space on the furniture. The dog was awake, watching Jake with alert eyes that seemed clearer and more hopeful than they had the night before. "Morning, boy," Jake said, sitting up slowly. "How you feeling?" The dog's tail wagged tentatively, a small but significant sign of trust. Jake got dressed and prepared another meal. Scrambled eggs this time, something more substantial. As the dog ate, Jake examined it more carefully in the morning light. The animal was definitely male, probably around 2 years old based on his teeth and size. Despite the abuse and malnutrition, he had good bone structure and intelligent eyes. This wasn't a street dog or an abandoned puppy. This was a purebred German Shepherd who'd been someone's property. Jake pulled out his phone and called Tommy "Wrench" Rodriguez, a fellow Hell's Angel who ran an auto shop and had connections throughout the city's underground network. "Ironhorse, what's got you up this early?" Tommy's voice was gravelly with sleep. "I need a favor, brother. Found a dog last night, tied up and left to die. German Shepherd, purebred. Someone did a number on him." There was a pause. Tommy had 2 kids and 3 rescue dogs of his own. "You thinking what I'm thinking?" "Yeah." This wasn't random cruelty. Someone trained this dog, invested money in him, then decided to throw him away. I want to know who. I'll make some calls. Got a friend who works at the animal control office, another who runs the German Shepherd rescue. If this dog was reported stolen or if there's been other cases. Appreciate it, Wrench. Jake hung up and looked at the dog, who was watching him intently. Don't worry, boy. We're going to find out who did this to you. By noon, Tommy had called back with disturbing news. 3 other German Shepherds had been found abandoned in similar circumstances over the past 6 months. All purebred, all showing signs of abuse, all discovered in industrial areas around the city. 2 had died before they could be rescued. There's something else, Tommy said. My contact at Animal Control says there have been reports of dogfighting rings operating in the area. Not the usual pit bull stuff. This is different. More organized, higher stakes. Jake felt his anger building. Dogfighting was a particular kind of evil, one that attracted the worst elements of society. The fact that someone was using German Shepherd suggested this wasn't street-level gambling, but something more sophisticated. I'm coming to the shop, Jake said, bringing the dog. Maybe your contact can tell us more. The ride to Tommy's auto shop was the dog's first real test of trust. Jake had fashioned a better harness system, and the animal seemed to understand that staying still was important. By the time they arrived, the dog was actually enjoying the wind in his fur. Tommy's shop occupied a full city block, its exterior deliberately run down to discourage unwanted attention. Inside, it was a different story. State-of-the-art equipment, pristine work bays, and enough security cameras to monitor a small country. It was also neutral territory, a place where information flowed freely among people who normally wouldn't share the same air. Maria Santos, Tommy's contact from Animal Control, was waiting for them. She was a small, fierce woman in her 50s who dedicated her life to protecting animals. When she saw the German Shepherd, her expression hardened. This is the 4th one, she said, kneeling to examine the dog. Same rope burns, same signs of systematic abuse. But this one's different. How so? Jake asked. Maria pointed to a small scar behind the dog's left ear. See this? That's from a microchip removal. Someone cut it out, probably with a knife. This dog was registered somewhere, and somebody wanted to make sure he couldn't be traced back. The microchip revelation changed everything. Jake had assumed they were dealing with random cruelty, but the deliberate removal of identification suggested something far more organized. Someone was acquiring registered dogs, using them for unknown purposes, then disposing of them when they were no longer useful. Maria made some calls, while Jake and Tommy discussed their next moves. The Hells Angels had their own code of justice, one that didn't always align with legal channels. But this situation was different. It involved innocent animals and potentially a larger criminal enterprise. Got something, Maria said, hanging up her phone. The microchip database shows a pattern. All 4 dogs were originally purchased from the same breeder, West Side German Shepherds, owned by a guy named Marcus Hoffman. High-end operation, dogs go for $3,000 to $5,000 each. Jake wrote down the information. Any of the original owners report them stolen. That's where it gets interesting. 3 of the 4 were reported stolen, but not by the original purchasers. They were reported by a secondary owner, someone who'd bought them from the original buyers. Tommy frowned. So someone's buying expensive dogs, then selling them to someone else, who then reports them stolen. Or, Jake said grimly, someone's buying them specifically to abuse them, and when they're done, they dump them. Maria nodded. There's more. I checked with some contacts in other cities. Similar patterns in Seattle, San Francisco, even Las Vegas. Always German Shepherds. Always from high-end breeders, always ending up abandoned or dead. The scope of the operation was becoming clear. This wasn't local cruelty. It was an organized network spanning multiple states. Jake felt the familiar surge of adrenaline that came before a major confrontation. The Hells Angels had dealt with organized crime before, but this was personal now. The dog, who'd been lying quietly during their conversation, suddenly stood and walked over to Jake. For the first time since the rescue, he pressed against Jake's leg, seeking comfort and offering trust. "What do you want to call him?" Tommy asked. Jake looked down at the intelligent brown eyes. "Justice," he said. "His name is Justice." West Side German Shepherds occupied 20 acres of prime real estate in the hills outside Portland. The facility was impressive: climate-controlled kennels, professional training areas, and a main house that spoke of serious money. Marcus Hoffman had built his reputation on producing dogs for law enforcement, military contracts, and wealthy private clients. Jake arrived alone, having decided that a full club presence might intimidate Hoffman into silence. He'd left Justice with Tommy, not wanting to traumatize the dog further if the conversation went badly. Hoffman was a man in his 60s, tall and lean, with the bearing of someone accustomed to authority. He greeted Jake with polite wariness, clearly recognizing the Hells Angels patches, but maintaining professional courtesy. "Mr. Morrison, you said on the phone you were interested in a protection dog. Actually, I'm here about some dogs you've already sold," Jake said, pulling out his phone to show pictures of Justice. "Recognize him?" Hoffman's expression changed immediately. "Where did you find him?" "Tied to a pole in the rain, half dead from abuse and starvation. Someone cut out his microchip." The breeder's face went pale. "That's Thor. I sold him 18 months ago to a very wealthy client. He was supposed to be a family protection dog." "Who was the buyer?" Hoffman hesitated, clearly torn between client confidentiality and genuine concern for the animal. "I can't give you names without a warrant, but I can tell you this. I've been having second thoughts about that sale for months." "Why?" "The buyer was unusual. Most of my clients want to meet the dogs, ask about temperament, training requirements. This guy just wanted the most aggressive dogs I had, and he was willing to pay double my asking price for immediate delivery." Jake felt his anger building. "How many dogs?" "6. All males, all from my most dominant bloodlines. He said he was starting a private security company, needed dogs for executive protection." "But you don't think that's what he was really doing?" Hoffman shook his head. "A few months after the sale, I started hearing rumors. Other breeders reporting similar sales, dogs disappearing, some turning up dead or abandoned. I tried to contact the buyer, but his phone was disconnected." "I need that name," Jake said quietly. The authority in his voice was unmistakable. Hoffman looked at him for a long moment, then walked to his office and returned with a file. "Richard Blackwood. Gave an address in the Pearl District, but I doubt it's real." The address Hoffman provided led to a luxury high-rise in Portland's Pearl District, one of the city's most expensive neighborhoods. Jake stood across the street, studying the building's security cameras and doorman. This wasn't the kind of place where you could simply walk in and start asking questions. He called Tommy from his bike. "I need you to run a name through your contacts. Richard Blackwood, probably fake, but maybe someone's heard of him." "Give me an hour," Tommy replied. "Also, Justice is doing better. Ate a full meal and let Maria give him a proper examination. She says he's going to be fine, physically at least." Jake felt a surge of relief. In just 2 days, the dog had become more than a rescue case. He'd become family. The thought of someone deliberately torturing Justice made Jake's vision blur with rage. While waiting for Tommy's callback, Jake decided to do some reconnaissance. He parked his bike several blocks away and walked back to the building, observing the patterns of residents and staff. The doorman was professional, but not overly suspicious. The kind of person who'd remember unusual visitors, but might be willing to talk for the right incentive. Jake's phone buzzed. Tommy's voice was grim. Got some information, none of it good. Richard Blackwood is an alias used by a guy named Vincent Carrera. He's connected to some very bad people. Money laundering, illegal gambling, and rumor has it, underground fighting rings. Dog fighting, among other things. My contact says Carrera likes to bet on anything that involves violence. Dogs, roosters, even underground human fighting. He's got enough money to stay above the law and enough connections to make problems disappear. Jake processed this information. They weren't dealing with simple animal cruelty anymore. They'd stumbled onto something much larger and more dangerous. But that didn't change his commitment to justice or to the other dogs who'd suffered. Where can I find him? That's the problem, brother. Guys like smoke. Lots of rumors, no solid locations, but I might have something. There's a warehouse in the industrial district, supposedly abandoned, but my sources say there's been unusual activity there lately. Jake smiled grimly. He knew the industrial district well. It was where he'd found justice. The warehouse Tommy had identified sat in the heart of Portland's industrial district, a sprawling complex of abandoned buildings and empty lots. Jake approached on foot, having parked his Harley several blocks away. The building appeared deserted, but subtle signs suggested otherwise. Fresh tire tracks in the mud, recently disturbed debris around the loading docks, and most tellingly, the faint sound of barking from somewhere inside. Jake circled the perimeter, noting security cameras and motion sensors that were far too sophisticated for an abandoned building. This was definitely Carrera's operation, and it was bigger than he'd anticipated. He found a service entrance on the building's north side, partially concealed by overgrown vegetation. The lock was new and expensive, but Jake had learned certain skills during his younger, less legal days. Within minutes, he was inside. The warehouse was a maze of corridors and storage rooms, most empty, but some clearly in recent use. Jake followed the sound of barking, his footsteps silent on the concrete floor. What he found in the building's central area made his blood run cold. 20 kennels lined the walls, most occupied by German shepherds in various states of health. Some were clearly new arrivals, still showing signs of good care. Others were thin and scarred, their eyes holding the same desperate fear Jake had seen in Justice. A few kennels were empty, but showed signs of recent occupation. In the center of the space was a circular area surrounded by tiered seating, a fighting ring. The floor was stained with blood, and the smell of fear and violence permeated the air. This wasn't just dogfighting, it was systematic torture disguised as entertainment. Jake pulled out his phone to document the scene, but froze when he heard voices approaching. He quickly found cover behind a stack of equipment crates, listening as two men entered the area. "Boss wants the new batch ready for Friday's event," one voice said. "Says we got some high-roller clients coming in from Vegas." "What about the ones that won't fight? The broken ones?" "Same as always. Dump them somewhere and let nature take its course." Jake's hands clenched into fists. These weren't just criminals. They were monsters. Jake made it out of the warehouse undetected, but what he'd seen burned in his memory like acid. The systematic cruelty, the casual discussion of disposing of broken animals, the sophisticated operation designed to profit from suffering, it all demanded a response that went beyond calling the police. Back at Tommy's shop, Jake called for an emergency meeting of the local Hells Angels chapter. Within 2 hours, 15 of his brothers had assembled, their faces growing darker as Jake described what he'd discovered. "This ain't just about one dog anymore," said Marcus Tank Williams, the chapter's sergeant-at-arms. "This is about sending a message that some lines don't get crossed." The room murmured agreement. The Hells Angels had their own code of honor, and protecting the innocent, whether human or animal, was part of that code. They dealt with drug dealers, corrupt cops, and rival gangs, but animal torture was a special kind of evil that demanded special attention. "What's the plan, Ironhorse?" asked Danny Reaper Martinez, the chapter president. "Jake had been thinking about this since leaving the warehouse. We can't just bust in there. Too many variables, too many innocent animals that could get hurt in the crossfire. We need to be smart about this." He outlined his strategy. They would gather more intelligence, identify all the players in Carrera's operation, and then strike simultaneously at multiple locations. The goal wasn't just to rescue the dogs, it was to completely dismantle the network and ensure it could never operate again. "What about the cops?" Tommy asked. "We'll tip them off after we're done," Jake replied. "Give them enough evidence to put these bastards away for life. But first, we handle this our way." The Brotherhood voted unanimously to support the operation. Each member would contribute resources, surveillance equipment, vehicles, contacts in various industries. By the time they were finished planning, they had a comprehensive strategy that would hit Carrera's operation from every angle. As the meeting broke up, Jake felt a familiar surge of anticipation. Justice would have his revenge, and every dog in those kennels would have a chance at freedom. Over the next 3 days, the Hells Angels conducted the most thorough investigation of their careers. Using a combination of street contacts, surveillance technology, and old-fashioned detective work, they mapped out Carrera's entire operation. The network was even larger than they'd initially suspected. Besides the main warehouse, there were 3 other locations: a training facility where dogs were conditioned for fighting, a veterinary clinic where injured animals received minimal care to keep them alive for future events, and a luxury estate where the actual fights took place for wealthy spectators. Maria Santos had provided crucial assistance, using her animal control credentials to access databases and veterinary records. What they discovered was a sophisticated business that had been operating for over 3 years, generating millions in revenue from betting and entertainment. "The client list reads like a who's who of Portland's elite," Maria reported during a briefing at Tommy's shop. Politicians, business leaders, even some law enforcement officials. These people weren't just betting on fights, they were paying premium prices to watch animals suffer. Jake studied the surveillance photos they'd gathered. Carrera was a thin, well-dressed man in his 50s who carried himself with the arrogance of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. His associates were a mix of street criminals and white-collar professionals, united by their appetite for cruelty. Justice, who'd been recovering at Tommy's shop, had become the unofficial mascot of the operation. The dog had gained weight and his coat was beginning to shine, but the psychological scars remained. He was gentle and trusting with the bikers, but any sudden movement or loud noise would send him into a defensive crouch. "He's getting better," Maria observed, watching Justice interact with the club members. "But he'll always remember what was done to him. Dogs don't forget trauma any more than people do." That evening, Jake made his final preparations. Tomorrow night, Carrera was hosting what his organization called a championship event, a series of fights featuring his most aggressive dogs. It would be the perfect time to strike, when all the key players would be in one location. "You ready for this, boy?" Jake asked Justice, who was lying beside his chair. The dog looked up with intelligent eyes that seemed to understand exactly what was coming. The Hells Angels struck at exactly 9 p.m. when Carrera's championship event was in full swing. Jake led the team targeting the main estate, while Tommy coordinated simultaneous raids on the warehouse and training facility. They'd timed their assault to coincide with the evening's main event, ensuring maximum impact and minimum escape opportunities. Jake's team approached the estate through the wooded area behind the main house, their black clothing and military-style coordination making them nearly invisible in the darkness. The sound of cheering and barking from inside the house guided them to their target, The estate's security was designed to keep out casual intruders, not a coordinated assault by experienced fighters. Within minutes, Jake's team had disabled the cameras and neutralized the guards without raising an alarm. They positioned themselves at every exit before making their move. Jake kicked in the front door just as the evening's main fight was reaching its climax. The scene inside was exactly what he'd expected. Wealthy spectators in expensive clothing, cheering as two terrified German shepherds were forced to attack each other in a makeshift ring. "Nobody moves!" Jake's voice cut through the noise like a blade. The reaction was immediate chaos. Some spectators tried to run, others reached for phones or weapons. But the Hells Angels had anticipated every response. Within seconds, they had control of the room. Carrera stood near the fighting ring, his face a mask of rage and disbelief. "You have no idea who you're dealing with," he snarled at Jake. "Actually, I do," Jake replied calmly. "You're the piece of garbage who tortured my dog." He gestured, and Justice walked into the room. The German shepherd had insisted on coming, despite Jake's initial reluctance. Now, seeing the dog's reaction to Carrera, Jake understood why. Justice's entire body went rigid, his lips pulling back in a silent snarl. This was recognition and remembered pain. "You remember him, don't you?" Jake said to Carrera. "One of your victims who got away." The police arrived exactly on schedule, responding to an anonymous tip about illegal gambling and animal cruelty. They found a warehouse full of evidence, detailed financial records, and a room full of Portland's elite caught in the act of participating in felony animal abuse. 6 months later, Jake stood in the yard behind his apartment, watching Justice play with a tennis ball. The transformation was remarkable. The terrified, broken animal he'd found tied to a pole had become a confident, happy dog who trusted completely in his human's protection. The legal aftermath of the raid had exceeded everyone's expectations. Carrera and 12 associates received sentences ranging from 5 to 15 years. The wealthy spectators faced public humiliation, criminal charges, and civil lawsuits that would bankrupt most of them. The network that had tortured and killed dozens of animals was completely dismantled. All 23 dogs rescued from the various facilities had found homes, many with Hells Angels members and their families. The Brotherhood had discovered an unexpected affinity for rescue work, and several members had begun volunteering with local animal shelters. Maria Santos had been promoted to head of Animal Control's new anti-cruelty task force, with funding provided by seized assets from Carrera's operation. She'd become a regular visitor to the clubhouse, coordinating rescue efforts and providing expert advice on animal care. "You know what the best part is?" Tommy said, joining Jake in the yard. "Word's gotten out about what we did. Other animal abusers in the area are shutting down their operations, afraid they might be next." Jake smiled, watching Justice drop the tennis ball at his feet with perfect trust. "Fear's a powerful motivator." "So what's next for you two?" Jake looked at his partner, because that's what Justice had become, a true partner in every sense of the word. "We're thinking about expanding our rescue operations. There are a lot of animals out there who need help, and we've got the resources to make a difference." Justice barked once, as if agreeing with the plan. In the distance, the sound of Harley engines announced the arrival of other club members for their weekly meeting. But tonight's agenda would be different. They'd be planning their next rescue mission, their next chance to bring justice to those who couldn't fight for themselves. Jake had found Justice tied to a pole on a rainy night, but in saving the dog, he discovered something he hadn't known he was looking for. A purpose that went beyond brotherhood and loyalty. A mission that gave meaning to all the violence and chaos of his life. Sometimes justice came on 2 wheels and 4 paws, and sometimes that was exactly what the world needed.